The first time Beatrice Ellis saw Flynn Jackson, she was wearing someone else's engagement ring and wondering if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. It was a Thursday afternoon in late September, and Beatrice stood in the marble lobby of the Grandview Hotel, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Her fiancé, Marcus, had just texted to say he would be another hour late to their wedding venue tour. The third time this week he had pushed something back. The fifth time this month. She told herself it did not matter, that Marcus was busy building his accounting practice, that this was what commitment looked like when you were adults with real responsibilities. But standing there alone, watching other couples walk past hand in hand, laughing about centerpieces and color schemes, Beatrice felt something hollow settle in her chest. "Excuse me, are you waiting for someone?" The voice came from behind her, deep and warm. Beatrice turned and found herself looking up at a man who seemed to take up more space than his physical form should allow. He was tall, probably 6'3", with dark hair that looked like he had run his hands through it a few times that day. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, and his eyes were the color of good whiskey in sunlight. "I am," Beatrice said, holding up her phone as if it were proof. "My fiancé. We are supposed to tour the ballroom." The man nodded, and something flickered across his face that Beatrice could not quite read. Disappointment, maybe, or just polite acknowledgement. "Flynn Jackson," he said, extending his hand. "I own the hotel." Beatrice shook his hand, trying not to notice how warm his palm was against hers. "Beatrice Ellis. I did not realize the owner personally greeted potential clients." "I don't usually," Flynn admitted, and there was something honest in the way he said it that made Beatrice's heart skip. "I was walking through and saw you standing here. You looked like you could use some company." "That obvious?" Beatrice tried to smile, but it felt wobbly on her face. "Only to someone who is paying attention," Flynn said. They stood there for a moment, the noise of the hotel lobby swirling around them, and Beatrice felt something shift in the air between them. It was not dramatic, not like lightning striking or the earth moving. It was quieter than that, like recognizing a song you had forgotten you loved. Marcus arrived 45 minutes later, breathless and apologetic, smelling like coffee and stress. He barely looked at Beatrice before launching into an explanation about a client emergency. Flynn had excused himself by then, disappearing into the administrative wing with a final glance at Beatrice that she felt all the way to her toes. The wedding planning continued. Beatrice chose ivory linens and blush roses. She tasted 7 different cake flavors and said yes to the chocolate raspberry, even though Marcus preferred vanilla. She sent out save the dates with a photo from their vacation in Maine, the one where they both looked happy, even though they had spent most of that trip arguing about restaurant choices. 3 months later, Beatrice married Marcus in a February ceremony that was beautiful and cold. The Grandview Hotel ballroom looked like something from a fairy tale, all twinkling lights and silk draping. Flynn Jackson was not there, of course. He had sent his assistant to oversee the event. Beatrice told herself she was not disappointed. She told herself a lot of things that day. The marriage lasted 2 years, 3 months and 16 days. It was not Marcus's fault, not really. He was not cruel or abusive. He did not cheat or lie or do any of the dramatic things that made for easy explanations. He was just absent, present in body but gone in all the ways that mattered. He worked 70-hour weeks and spent his rare free time playing golf with clients. He forgot Beatrice's birthday twice and their anniversary once. When she tried to talk to him about it, he looked at her like she was speaking a language he had never learned. "I am providing for us," Marcus said during their last real conversation. "Is that not enough?" And Beatrice realized, sitting across from him at their kitchen table, that for him it was enough. For her, it had never been. The divorce was quiet and civilized. They split their modest assets down the middle. Marcus kept the condo. Beatrice took her grandmother's china and her freedom and moved into a small apartment in the arts district, where the rent was cheap and the walls were thin and she could finally breathe. She was 29 years old and starting over. Beatrice had always been good with flowers. As a child, she had spent summers in her grandmother's garden, learning the names of roses and the secret language of peonies. After the divorce, she turned that childhood love into a career, taking a job at a boutique floral shop called Petals and Stems. The owner, a 60-year-old woman named Margaret with silver hair and kind eyes, took one look at Beatrice's resume and hired her on the spot. "You have sad eyes," Margaret said that first day, "but good hands. You will be fine here." Beatrice was not sure about the fine part, but she showed up every day at 7 in the morning and lost herself in the work. She learned to create arrangements that made people cry happy tears. She mastered the art of wiring bouquets and the science of keeping cut flowers alive. She found, to her surprise, that she was happy. Or at least, she was not unhappy anymore. 6 months after her divorce was finalized, Beatrice was working on a large order for a corporate event when Margaret called her into the office. "We have been asked to do the flowers for a gala next month," Margaret said, sliding a folder across her desk. "The Grandview Hotel. It is their annual charity fundraiser, very high profile." Beatrice's stomach dropped. "The Grandview, I know," Margaret said, misunderstanding her reaction. "Big opportunity for us. The event coordinator specifically requested our shop, said they wanted something elegant but unexpected." Beatrice opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside was a detailed brief about the event, including photos of the ballroom. The same ballroom where she had gotten married, where she had last seen Flynn Jackson, even if it had only been from a distance. She had not thought about him in months. Or at least she had tried not to. But sometimes, late at night when sleep would not come, Beatrice remembered the way he had looked at her in that lobby, like she was someone worth paying attention to, like she mattered. "I will do it," Beatrice heard herself say. The week before the gala, Beatrice spent every waking hour at the shop, creating centerpieces that were small works of art. She used garden roses in deep burgundy, paired with trailing amaranthus and unexpected touches of silver brunia. Margaret watched her work with an approving smile. "You are putting your heart into this," Margaret observed one evening as they packed up for the day. "It is an important client," Beatrice said, not quite meeting her boss's eyes. "It is more than that," Margaret said, but she did not push and Beatrice was grateful. The night of the gala arrived with unseasonable warmth. Beatrice and 2 other florists from the shop spent the afternoon transforming the Grandview ballroom. The flowers looked even better than she had imagined, each arrangement a perfect balance of structure and wildness. By 6 o'clock, everything was in place and Margaret sent everyone home to rest. "You should stay," Margaret said to Beatrice. "You worked the hardest. Enjoy the fruits of your labor." "I do not have a ticket," Beatrice protested. "Or a dress." Margaret just smiled. "I may have purchased a ticket in your name, and there is a garment bag in my car that I think will fit you. Call it a bonus." Beatrice wanted to argue, but the truth was, she wanted to stay. She wanted to see Flynn Jackson again, even if he did not remember her, even if nothing came of it. She just wanted to know if that moment in the lobby 3 years ago had been real or just her imagination filling in the gaps of her lonely engagement. The dress Margaret had bought was simple but elegant. A deep emerald green that made Beatrice's auburn hair look like fire. She changed in the hotel bathroom, applied lipstick with shaking hands, and walked back into the ballroom just as the first guests were arriving. The gala was everything she expected. Rich people in expensive clothes, drinking champagne and talking about their vacation homes. Beatrice felt out of place immediately, but she made herself circulate, accepting compliments on the flowers and trying not to search the crowd for a tall man with whiskey-colored eyes. She found him by accident, or maybe by fate. Beatrice had stepped out onto the hotel's terrace for air when she heard someone say her name. Beatrice Ellis. She turned, and there he was, Flynn Jackson, looking even better than she remembered in a black tuxedo that must have cost more than her monthly rent. His hair was shorter now, touched with gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes that had not been there before. But his smile was the same, warm and real and directed entirely at her. "You remember me," Beatrice said, hating how breathless she sounded. "Of course I remember you," Flynn said, moving closer. "You got married here, in February 3 years ago. You remember my wedding." "I remember you," Flynn corrected. "Standing in the lobby looking lost. I remember thinking that whoever you were waiting for was an idiot for making you wait." Beatrice laughed, surprised and a little off balance. "Well, you were right about that. We divorced last year." Something shifted in Flynn's expression. Not pleasure at her pain, but something gentler. Understanding, maybe. "I am sorry," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. "I am not," Beatrice said, surprising herself with the honesty. It was the right thing to do. They stood there on the terrace, the sounds of the party drifting through the open doors, and talked, really talked. Flynn told her about growing up in Boston, the youngest of 4 brothers, how he had bought the Grandview 10 years ago when it was falling apart, and turned it into one of the most sought-after venues in the city. Beatrice told him about her grandmother's garden, about learning to love flowers before she understood heartbreak, about starting over at 29. "The arrangements tonight are yours," Flynn said after a while. It was not a question. "How did you know?" "Because they are perfect," Flynn said simply. "And I remember thinking that anyone who could look that alive in a moment of sadness must have a gift for beauty." Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks. "That is quite the assumption to make about a stranger." "You are not a stranger," Flynn said, and there was something in his voice that made Beatrice's heart race. "I have been thinking about you for 3 years, Beatrice, wondering if you were happy, hoping that you were." "I was not," Beatrice admitted, "but I am now, or at least I am getting there." Flynn reached out slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted. When she did not move, he tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers warm against her skin. "Have dinner with me," he said. "Tomorrow night, somewhere with good food and no hotel ballrooms." Beatrice knew she should hesitate, should think it through, make a list of pros and cons, protect herself from potential heartbreak. But standing there on the terrace with Flynn Jackson looking at her like she was the only person in the world, Beatrice decided to take a leap. "Yes," she said. "I would like that." The next evening, Flynn picked her up in a car that cost more than most houses. Beatrice had spent an hour trying to decide what to wear before settling on a simple navy dress and her favorite boots. When Flynn saw her, his smile could have powered the entire city. "You look beautiful," he said, opening the car door for her. "You look pretty good yourself," Beatrice said, and felt some of her nervousness ease at his laugh. He took her to a small Italian restaurant tucked away in a neighborhood she had never explored. The kind of place with red checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles and food that tasted like love. They shared bruschetta and argued playfully about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. They drank red wine and talked about everything and nothing. "So when you said you own the Grandview," Beatrice said carefully, twirling pasta around her fork, "what exactly does that mean?" Flynn took a sip of wine, his expression amused. "It means I own the Grandview and 3 other hotels and a restaurant group and some other investments." Beatrice set down her fork. "You are rich." "I am," Flynn admitted. "Does that bother you?" "I do not know yet," Beatrice said honestly. "I just divorced a man who thought providing money was the same as showing up. I need to know you understand the difference." Flynn was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was serious. "My father was a CEO who missed every baseball game, every school play, every moment that mattered. He died when I was 15 and I barely knew him. I swore I would never be that person." He reached across the table, covering Beatrice's hand with his. "Money is just money, Beatrice. It cannot buy the things that matter. I learned that a long time ago." "What matters?" Beatrice asked, her heart pounding. "This," Flynn said simply. "Connection, honesty, being present. Actually showing up for the people you care about." They talked until the restaurant was closing, until the owner gently suggested they might want to continue their conversation elsewhere. Flynn drove her home, walked her to her door, and kissed her cheek with a gentleness that made Beatrice's knees weak. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "You better," Beatrice said, and watched his face break into a grin. Over the next 2 months, Flynn Jackson proved that he was exactly who he said he was. He showed up, not with expensive gifts or grand gestures, but with presence. He came to the flower shop on his lunch breaks, not to take her out, but just to see her, to steal 10 minutes of conversation among the roses. He remembered that she took her coffee with cream and no sugar. He asked about her day and actually listened to the answers. For their third date, Flynn took Beatrice to a pottery class, even though he admitted he was terrible with his hands. They spent 2 hours covered in clay, laughing at their lopsided creations and stealing kisses when the instructor was not looking. For their fifth date, Beatrice planned a picnic in the park, complete with sandwiches she made herself and a cheap bottle of wine. Flynn told her it was the best meal he had ever had. "You do not have to pretend," Beatrice said, watching him take another bite of her slightly soggy sandwich. "I know you eat at 5-star restaurants." "I am not pretending," Flynn said seriously. "This is perfect because I am here with you. That is what makes it matter." Beatrice felt something tight in her chest loosen. She had been so scared after Marcus of jumping into something new. But with Flynn, it did not feel like jumping. It felt like coming home. By the time October turned into November, they were inseparable. Flynn brought Beatrice to his house, a beautiful modern home with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. It was elegant and expensive, and somehow still felt warm, filled with comfortable furniture and books and signs of an actual life. "I was expecting something colder," Beatrice admitted as they sat on his couch, her feet tucked under her, his arm around her shoulders. "Money does not have to mean cold," Flynn said. "I want a home, not a museum." "Is this your way of saying you want me to move in?" Beatrice teased, even though her heart was racing at the thought. Flynn turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Not yet, but eventually, yes." "I want that, Beatrice. I want everything with you." "It has only been 2 months," Beatrice said, but she was not arguing, just stating facts. "I know," Flynn said. "And I am not asking you to decide anything tonight. I just want you to know where I stand. I am not looking for something casual. I am not interested in wasting time. I have been waiting 3 years to have you in my life. Now that you are here, I am not letting go." Beatrice kissed him then, deep and long and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, she was smiling. "Good," she said, "because I am not going anywhere." The holiday season arrived, bringing with it a flurry of work at both the flower shop and Flynn's hotels. Beatrice spent long days creating arrangements for parties and events. Flynn juggled the demands of running multiple businesses while somehow still making time to see her every day, even if it was just for coffee in the morning or a late dinner at night. One evening in mid-December, Flynn picked her up after work with an unusual request. "I have a work thing tonight," he said as Beatrice climbed into his car. "A benefit dinner. I know it is last minute, but would you come with me?" Beatrice looked down at her work clothes, covered in bits of greenery and probably smelling like roses. "I am not exactly dressed for a benefit dinner." "We have time," Flynn said. "And I may have taken the liberty of having something delivered to my house for you, if you want to wear it. If not, you are perfect as you are." The dress waiting in Flynn's guest room was stunning, a deep wine red silk that fit her perfectly. There were shoes too, and simple but elegant jewelry. Beatrice stared at it all, torn between gratitude and discomfort. "Flynn," she called out, and he appeared in the doorway immediately. "Too much?" he asked, reading her expression. "It is beautiful," Beatrice said carefully. "But I do not need you to buy me things." "I know you do not," Flynn said, coming to stand in front of her. "But I wanted to. Not because I think you need saving or because I am trying to change you, but because I saw this dress and thought of you, and I wanted to see you in it. If that makes you uncomfortable, we do not go to the dinner, or you wear what you have on, or we run to a store and get something else. I am flexible on everything except having you by my side tonight." Beatrice looked at him, this man who somehow managed to be both powerful and gentle, and made a decision. "Help me with the zipper," she asked. The benefit dinner was at the Grandview, in the same ballroom where they had first really talked. Beatrice walked in on Flynn's arm, feeling like she was in a dream. The room was full of important people, business leaders and politicians, and the kind of society figures who appeared in magazine spreads. And Flynn introduced her to all of them, not as his date but as his girlfriend, with pride in his voice that made Beatrice's heart swell. "That is Flynn Jackson," she heard someone whisper as they passed. "Owns half the city, worth millions, billions," someone else corrected. "And he is one of the good ones. Actually cares about the charities he supports." Beatrice glanced at Flynn, saw him talking with an elderly woman about her grandson's college fund, and felt a rush of affection so strong it almost knocked her over. He was good. Not just rich, not just successful, but fundamentally decent in a way that had nothing to do with money. Later, as they danced to a slow song, Beatrice rested her head against Flynn's chest and let herself imagine a future. Not just dates and dinners, but a real life. Waking up next to him. Building something together. Having a partner who actually showed up. "What are you thinking about?" Flynn asked, his voice rumbling in his chest. "You," Beatrice admitted. "Us. How strange it is that I met you on one of the worst days of my life, and now you are making all my days better." Flynn's arms tightened around her. "I remember that day so clearly. You were wearing a blue dress. Your hair was down, and you looked so sad standing there alone. I wanted to ask you to leave with me, to forget whoever you were waiting for and just walk out the door with me instead." "Why did you not?" Beatrice asked, tilting her head back to look at him. "Because you had an engagement ring on," Flynn said simply. "And because I am not the kind of man who tries to steal someone else's future, even when I wanted to." "I am not wearing anyone's ring now," Beatrice said softly. "No," Flynn agreed, and there was something in his eyes that made Beatrice's breath catch. "You are not." Christmas came, and Flynn closed his hotels for one day, giving his entire staff paid time off. He and Beatrice spent the holiday at his house, cooking an ambitious dinner that turned into a hilarious disaster when they realized neither of them knew how to properly roast a turkey. They ended up ordering Chinese food and eating it on the floor in front of his fireplace, laughing until they cried. "This is the best Christmas I have ever had," Beatrice said as they lay tangled together on a pile of blankets. "Even though we failed at cooking." Flynn asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Especially because we failed at cooking," Beatrice said. It was real. We did it together. That is all I want, Flynn, not perfection, just partnership. You have it, Flynn promised, for as long as you want me. What about forever? Beatrice asked, half joking, half serious. Forever works for me, Flynn said, and kissed her until she forgot about everything except the feeling of being exactly where she belonged. The new year brought changes. Margaret announced she was retiring, and she wanted to sell petals and stems to Beatrice. It was a dream opportunity, but the price was more than Beatrice could afford, even with a business loan. She spent a week crunching numbers and realizing it was not going to work, feeling her dream slip through her fingers. She did not tell Flynn right away. Some old instinct from her marriage made her want to handle it herself, to not burden him with her problems. But Flynn noticed anyway, the way he always noticed. "You have been quiet," he said one evening as they ate dinner at her apartment. Beatrice had insisted on cooking, wanting to do something normal after weeks of fancy dinners and events. "What is going on?" Beatrice set down her fork. "Margaret wants to sell me the shop." "That is amazing," Flynn said, his face lighting up. Then he saw her expression and sobered. "What is wrong?" "I cannot afford it," Beatrice admitted. "I have savings, but not enough, and the bank will not give me a loan big enough to cover the difference. Not with my credit still recovering from the divorce." Flynn was quiet for a moment, and Beatrice could see him thinking. "Let me help," he finally said. "No," Beatrice said immediately. "Flynn, I appreciate it, but I cannot take money from you. It would not be taking," Flynn said carefully. "It would be an investment, a loan if that makes you more comfortable, with whatever terms you want." "It would change things between us," Beatrice said, feeling tears prick her eyes. "Money always changes things." Flynn reached across the table, taking both her hands in his. "Beatrice, look at me." She did, meeting his steady gaze. "Money only changes things if you let it, if you use it as a substitute for showing up, for caring, for being present. I am not offering you money to fix your problem. I am offering to be your partner in building something you want." "There is a difference. What if we break up?" Beatrice asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if this does not work out and I owe you money and everything gets complicated?" "We are not going to break up," Flynn said with absolute certainty. "But if you need security, we draw up a contract. Make it official and clear. I lend you the money at whatever interest rate makes you comfortable. You pay me back on whatever schedule works for you, and our relationship stays completely separate from the business arrangement." Beatrice wanted to say no. Wanted to be independent and strong and not need anyone's help. But she was tired of pretending she had to do everything alone. And more than that, she trusted Flynn. Trusted him in a way she had never trusted Marcus. "I would want to pay you back," she said. "Every penny with interest." "I would expect nothing less," Flynn said, and his smile was warm with understanding. They drew up a contract, made it legal and clear. Flynn lent her the money, and Beatrice bought petals and stems. She changed the name to Ellis Gardens and threw herself into running the business. Flynn was there for every milestone, from the new sign going up to the first big contract she landed on her own. But he never tried to control anything, never offered unsolicited advice. He just showed up, celebrated her wins, and supported her through the challenges. Spring arrived, bringing with it an explosion of business. Beatrice was working 14-hour days, managing staff and dealing with difficult clients and learning the hard way that owning a business was different from working for one. She came home exhausted every night, often too tired to do more than collapse on her couch. Flynn noticed, of course. He started showing up at her apartment in the evenings with dinner, simple meals that did not require her to do anything but eat. He rubbed her feet while she talked about her day. He listened to her vent about demanding customers and never once suggested she should just quit or that he could fix it all with money. "You are too good to me," Beatrice said one evening as Flynn unpacked Thai food in her kitchen. "I am exactly as good as you deserve," Flynn corrected. "Which is very good indeed." "I am a mess," Beatrice said, gesturing to her wrinkled clothes and the pile of paperwork covering her coffee table. "I barely have time to shower, let alone be a proper girlfriend." Flynn set down the food and came to stand in front of her, cupping her face in his hands. "Beatrice, being present does not mean being perfect. It means showing up as you are. You are building a dream. I am honored to be here while you do it, even if here means eating takeout surrounded by invoices." "I love you," Beatrice said, and then froze, realizing what she had just admitted. Flynn's face transformed, his smile so bright it could have lit the entire apartment. "Finally," he said, "I have been in love with you since you said yes to dinner 6 months ago. Maybe since you stood in that lobby 3 years ago looking lost. I was beginning to think you would never catch up." "You love me?" Beatrice asked, needing to hear it again. "I love you," Flynn said firmly. "I love your drive and your passion, and the way you talk to flowers like they are your friends. I love that you make terrible sandwiches and refuse to admit it. I love that you are stubborn and independent, and sometimes too proud to ask for help. I love you, Beatrice Ellis, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." They made love that night with a tenderness that stole Beatrice's breath. After, lying tangled together in her bed, Flynn traced patterns on her skin and whispered promises in the dark. Promises to show up. To be present. To build a life together that was about more than money or success, but about actual partnership. Summer brought new challenges. One of Flynn's hotels was sued by a former employee, a messy situation that required his constant attention. Beatrice watched him handle it with grace, never once letting it affect how he showed up for her. He still came by the shop on his lunch breaks, still called every night before bed, even when he was exhausted, still made her feel like she was the most important thing in his life. "How do you do it?" Beatrice asked one evening as they walked along the harbor. "Balance everything, the business stuff and us, and never make me feel like I am an obligation." "Because you are not an obligation," Flynn said simply. "You are the thing that makes everything else worth doing. Work is work. Money is money. But you, Beatrice, you are my life. Everything else is just how I spend my time when I am not with you." In July, Flynn had to travel to Boston for 2 weeks to deal with a property acquisition. It was the longest they had been apart since they started dating, and Beatrice was surprised by how much she missed him. They video called every night, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence while they worked on their respective tasks. "I bought something today," Flynn said during one of their calls. He was in his hotel room, looking tired but happy. "Want to see it?" "Is it another absurdly expensive tie?" Beatrice teased. Flynn had a weakness for designer accessories that she found both amusing and endearing. "Better," Flynn said. He held up his phone to show her a photo. It was a small building, brick and charming, with large windows and a garden courtyard. "It is a few blocks from my house. I was thinking it could be a satellite location for Ellis Gardens. Or maybe a studio space where you could teach classes. Whatever you want." Beatrice stared at the image, feeling emotion clog her throat. "Flynn, that is too much." "It is an investment property," Flynn said, "but I am not going to lie and say I did not buy it with you in mind. You do not have to use it if you do not want to. I just saw it and thought of you, of how you mentioned wanting to expand. I wanted to make that possible." "What if I cannot afford the rent?" Beatrice asked. "Then we figure out terms that work," Flynn said. "Beatrice, money is just a tool. It cannot buy happiness or love or the things that really matter. But it can open doors. Let me open this door for you. What you do with it is entirely up to you." Beatrice thought about her ex-husband, how he had used money as a substitute for presence. How he had thought providing was the same as caring. Flynn was different. Flynn showed up every single day in ways that had nothing to do with money. The building was not a substitute for his attention. It was an extension of it, a way of supporting her dreams while still letting her be in control. "I want to see it in person before I decide," Beatrice said finally. "I will take you the day I get back," Flynn promised. When Flynn returned to the city, he looked exhausted. The acquisition had been complicated, requiring late nights and difficult negotiations. But the first thing he did was drive straight to Beatrice's shop, walk in covered in travel dust, and pull her into his arms. "I missed you," he said into her hair. "I missed you too," Beatrice said, holding him tight. Around them, her staff pretended not to stare, but she could feel their amused attention. That evening, Flynn took her to see the building. It was even better in person, full of light and possibility. Beatrice walked through the empty space, imagining workshops and displays and a garden where she could grow her own flowers. "What do you think?" Flynn asked, leaning against a wall and watching her with soft eyes. "I think you know me too well," Beatrice said. "I think this is perfect and terrifying, and I do not know if I am ready for it." "You are ready," Flynn said with absolute certainty. "And you do not have to decide today, or this month, or even this year. The building is not going anywhere." Beatrice walked over to him, wrapped her arms around his waist, and breathed in the familiar scent of his cologne. "Why are you so patient with me?" "Because you are worth being patient for," Flynn said simply. "Because I am not in a hurry. I have the rest of my life to spend with you." By September, a full year after they had reconnected at the gala, Beatrice had made her decision. She signed a lease for the building and began the process of opening a second location. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and Flynn was there for every moment, offering support but never trying to take control. The night before the grand opening of Ellis Garden Studio, Beatrice could not sleep. She lay in Flynn's bed, her mind racing with 1,000 worries, while he slept peacefully beside her. She had moved in with him 3 months ago, a decision that felt natural and right, and still, sometimes, made her marvel at how different this relationship was from her marriage. "You are thinking too loud," Flynn mumbled, rolling over to pull her against his chest. "Sorry," Beatrice whispered. "I did not mean to wake you." "What are you worried about?" Flynn asked, more alert now. "Everything," Beatrice admitted. "What if no one shows up tomorrow? What if this whole expansion was a mistake? What if I am not good enough to pull this off?" Flynn was quiet for a moment, his hand stroking her hair with a gentleness that made her want to cry. "Do you remember what you told me once? About how flowers are about more than just looking pretty? About how they are about connection and emotion and marking moments that matter." "I remember," Beatrice said. "You are good enough," Flynn said firmly. "More than good enough. You have a gift, Beatrice, not just for arranging flowers, but for understanding what people need. For creating beauty that means something. Tomorrow is going to be amazing because you are amazing." "How are you always so sure?" Beatrice asked. "Because I pay attention," Flynn said. "Because I show up and I watch you work and I see how much you care. That is what makes the difference. Not talent or luck or money, but caring enough to do it right." The grand opening was a success. People came in waves, admiring the studio space and signing up for workshops and placing orders for arrangements. Margaret was there, beaming with pride at what Beatrice had built. Flynn stayed in the background most of the day, just being present, offering a steady hand when Beatrice needed it and staying out of the way when she did not. That night, after everyone had left and it was just the two of them in the empty studio, Flynn pulled Beatrice into a slow dance even though there was no music. "I am so proud of you," he said as they swayed together. I could not have done it without you, Beatrice said honestly. Yes, you could have, Flynn corrected. Maybe it would have taken longer or looked different, but you would have found a way. That is who you are. I do not want to do things without you anymore, Beatrice said, looking up at him. I spent 2 years in a marriage where I felt completely alone. And now I have you, and I cannot imagine going back to that. I do not want to. Good, Flynn said, and there was something in his voice that made Beatrice's heart race. Because I have a question for you. He stepped back, and before Beatrice fully processed what was happening, Flynn was down on one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. Beatrice Ellis, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. I knew the moment I saw you in that lobby 3 years ago that you were special. I spent 3 years thinking about you, hoping you were happy, wishing I could be the one to make you smile. And then you walked back into my life, and everything made sense. You have taught me that showing up is about more than just being physically present. It is about paying attention, about caring, about building a life together where both people matter equally. He opened the box, revealing a ring that was perfect in its simplicity. A single diamond, elegant and understated, set in platinum. I do not want to just date you or live with you or spend most of my time with you, Flynn continued. I want to marry you. I want to stand up in front of everyone we know and promise to show up for you every single day for the rest of our lives. I want to be your partner in every sense of the word. Will you marry me? Beatrice was crying, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too. Yes, she said. Yes, absolutely yes. Flynn slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, of course it did. Then he stood and kissed her, deep and long and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, Beatrice was laughing. I married the wrong man the first time, she said, touching Flynn's face with gentle hands, but I found my way back to the right one. I spent 3 years waiting for you to be free, Flynn said, and every moment of waiting was worth it. Because now I get to spend the rest of my life loving you. They got married 4 months later in January in a small ceremony at the Grandview Hotel. Not in the ballroom where Beatrice had married Marcus, but in a smaller room with windows overlooking the garden. Only close friends and family were there, just 60 people who genuinely loved them and wanted to celebrate their happiness. Beatrice wore a simple ivory dress and carried a bouquet of garden roses that she had grown and arranged herself. Flynn wore a navy suit and cried when he saw her walking down the aisle. Their vows were personal and honest, promises to show up and be present and build a life that was about partnership, not just coexistence. Margaret was there, beaming with pride. Flynn's 3 older brothers came, rowdy and loud and clearly thrilled that their baby brother had found someone who made him happy. And when the officiant pronounced them married, Flynn kissed Beatrice like she was the most precious thing in the world. At the reception, they danced to the same song that had been playing the night Flynn proposed. Beatrice rested her head against her husband's chest and felt complete in a way she never had before. "What are you thinking about?" Flynn asked, echoing a question he had asked 100 times before. "How lucky I am," Beatrice said. "How I almost missed this because I was too scared to try again." "You did not miss it," Flynn said. "You found your way here. That is what matters." "You waited for me," Beatrice said, tilting her head back to look at him. 3 years you waited." "I would have waited longer," Flynn said simply. "You were worth waiting for. You will always be worth it." They honeymooned in Tuscany, spending 2 weeks exploring vineyards and tiny villages and generally being tourists. Flynn insisted on leaving his phone in the hotel safe most days, wanting to be fully present. They ate too much pasta and drank too much wine and made love in hotel rooms with views of rolling hills. It was perfect not because it was fancy, but because they were together. When they returned home, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Beatrice continued to run Ellis Gardens, expanding the business slowly and carefully. Flynn managed his hotels, making decisions that prioritized people over profits and proving that success did not require sacrificing your values. They had dinner together every night, sometimes cooking at home, sometimes trying new restaurants. They spent weekends working in the garden behind their house, planning trips, visiting Flynn's family in Boston. 2 years after their wedding, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. She had not been sure she wanted children after everything with Marcus, but with Flynn it felt different, safe, right. When she told him, Flynn picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are having a baby," he kept saying, like he could not quite believe it. "We are having a baby," Beatrice confirmed, and felt her heart expand with a happiness she had not known was possible. Their daughter, Rose, was born in October, 3 years to the day after Beatrice and Flynn had reconnected at the gala. She had Flynn's dark hair and Beatrice's green eyes, and from the moment she entered the world, she was the center of their universe. Flynn was an amazing father. He took paternity leave, something that shocked his business partners but made perfect sense to anyone who knew him. He changed diapers and learned to swaddle and walked the floor at 3 in the morning when Rose would not sleep. He showed up, just like he had promised in that hotel lobby years ago, just like he had proven every day since. One evening, when Rose was 6 months old, Beatrice stood in the doorway of the nursery and watched Flynn rock their daughter to sleep. He was singing softly, something off-key and made up, and Rose was fighting sleep with fluttering eyelids. The scene was so perfect, so exactly what Beatrice had always wanted but never thought she could have, that she felt tears prick her eyes. Flynn looked up and saw her watching. "Hey," he whispered. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Beatrice whispered back. "Everything is right. So completely right that it scares me sometimes." Flynn stood carefully, placing Rose in her crib with practiced ease. Then he came to Beatrice, wrapping his arms around her and pulling her close. "It does not have to be scary," he said softly. "This is what love is supposed to feel like. Safe and warm and right." "I know," Beatrice said, "but I also know how easy it is to lose. I lost it once before." "You did not lose it," Flynn corrected gently. "You never had it, not really. Marcus did not know how to show up. He did not know how to be present, but I do, Beatrice. And I am not going anywhere. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Promise?" Beatrice asked, hearing the vulnerability in her own voice. "I promise," Flynn said. "I promised it in that lobby when I wished I could ask you to leave with me. I promised it when we had dinner that first time. I promised it when I asked you to marry me. And I promise it now. I am here, Beatrice. Right here, right where I belong." They stood there in the doorway of their daughter's nursery, holding each other while Rose slept peacefully, and Beatrice understood what she had been too hurt to see before. Being the right person was not about money or status or grand gestures. It was about showing up. It was about being present. It was about choosing every single day to be there for the person you loved. Flynn had been the right person all along. She had just married the wrong man first and had to find her way back. Life continued its beautiful, messy way. Rose grew into a toddler with her father's curiosity and her mother's love of nature. Ellis Gardens flourished, becoming one of the most sought-after florists in the city. Flynn's hotel empire expanded, but he never let business consume him the way some people did. He coached Rose's soccer team when she was old enough. He still showed up at the flower shop on his lunch breaks, stealing kisses and making Beatrice laugh. He remembered anniversaries and birthdays, and the small moments that made life rich. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Flynn surprised Beatrice with a trip back to the Grandview Hotel. He had reserved the same ballroom where they had reconnected, had it decorated with flowers from Ellis Gardens, and arranged a private dinner for just the two of them. "Why here?" Beatrice asked as they walked into the ballroom hand in hand. "Because this is where everything changed," Flynn said. "This is where I got to talk to you, really talk to you for the first time. This is where I realized that waiting for you had been worth it." They ate dinner at a table placed right where they had stood on the terrace that first night. They danced to their song. They talked about the life they had built and the future they were creating. And when the night was over, Flynn pulled Beatrice close and whispered in her ear. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" Beatrice asked, confused. "For finding your way back to me," Flynn said. "For being brave enough to try again. For giving me the chance to show you what love is supposed to look like." "I am the one who should be thanking you," Beatrice said. "You waited for me when you had no reason to believe I would ever be free. You showed up when I needed it most. You taught me that being right for someone means being right there, present and engaged and actually caring." "We taught each other," Flynn said. "That is what partnership means." They went home that night to their house by the harbor, where Rose was asleep upstairs and the life they had built together waited for them. As Beatrice got ready for bed, she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized herself. Not because she looked different, but because she looked happy. Genuinely, deeply, bone-deep happy in a way she had never been before. Flynn came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "How grateful I am," Beatrice said honestly. "How lucky I am that you saw me in that lobby all those years ago, that you remembered me, that you waited." "I would do it all again," Flynn said. 1,000 times over, because this right here is everything I ever wanted. Not the money or the business or any of that. Just this. You, Rose, our life together. That is what being right means. Being right here, present and accounted for, showing up every single day. Years passed, full and rich and beautiful. Rose grew up watching her parents love each other with a steadiness that became her foundation. They gave her a brother when she was 4, a wild little boy named James who had Flynn's sense of humor and Beatrice's stubborn streak. The family expanded and evolved, but at its core remained the same simple truth that had brought Beatrice and Flynn together in the first place. Love was about showing up. It was about being present. It was about choosing, again and again, to be there for the person who mattered most. On the 10th anniversary of the gala where they had reconnected, Beatrice and Flynn hosted their own charity fundraiser at the Grandview Hotel. Ellis Gardens had grown into a full-service event company, and the decorations were stunning, better even than the arrangements Beatrice had created a decade earlier. The event raised a record amount for local charities, but what mattered most to Beatrice was standing in that ballroom with Flynn beside her, surrounded by the life they had built together. "You ever think about that first night?" Flynn asked as they stood on the terrace where they had talked all those years ago. "When you were still married and I wanted to ask you to run away with me but could not because it was not the right time." "All the time," Beatrice admitted. "I think about how lost I felt, how alone. And then I think about how you saw me anyway, how you remembered me, how you waited for the right time instead of forcing the wrong one." "Timing matters," Flynn said, "but so does recognition. I recognized you that first day in the lobby. Recognized something essential in you that called to something in me. And when you were finally free, when the timing was finally right, I recognized the opportunity for what it was. A chance to build something real with someone who understood what really mattered. What really matters?" Beatrice asked, even though she knew the answer. "This," Flynn said, gesturing to the ballroom behind them, to their life, to the decade of showing up they had built together. "Being present, being engaged, choosing each other every single day, not because it is easy, but because it is right. That is what I meant when I proposed. That is what I mean every time I come home to you. You are my right one, Beatrice, not because you are perfect, but because we are perfect together. And being right together means being right there, present and committed and actually in it. That is love. That is partnership. That is everything. Beatrice kissed him then, there on the terrace where they had first really seen each other, and felt the truth of his words sink deep into her bones. She had married the wrong man first, yes. Had spent 2 years learning what love should not feel like. But that experience had taught her to recognize the real thing when it finally showed up. And Flynn had shown up. Not just once, but every day for 10 years. He had proven that being the right person meant being right there, present and engaged and committed. He had taught her that money was just money, that success was just success. But love was something you built one day at a time through the simple act of choosing to be present. As the party continued inside and they stood together on the terrace, Beatrice felt peace settle over her like a warm blanket. This was her life. These were her choices, and she had chosen right. "I love you," she said to Flynn, the words carrying a decade of gratitude and joy. "I love you too," Flynn said. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after that, I will be right here," and he was.